Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Forest Focus webinar this evening. As a reminder, all the webinars are available on our Forest School YouTube channel. Please note we're not expecting any technical difficulties, but if any arise, please do patient and bear with us. Our next webinar will be after half term on Thursday, the 7th of November, and we will focus on the theme on mental health. This evening, I'm pleased to welcome Professor Lee Hoof. Lee is Deputy Dean of Leeds Trinity University and Professor of Science Education. She's the outgoing Chair of the Association for Science Education, where she is involved in many committees and aspects of furthering the teaching and learning of science. This year, Lee was awarded the National Teaching Fellowship, the highest individual recognition in higher education. Lee is also the co-founder of Climate Adapted Pathway Education, CAPE, an alliance of researchers, educators, schools and partners across the UK who are all working to change today's education for tomorrow's climate. Lee also led the content design for the BBC's Regenerators Education resources and their Blue Planet live resources, and is also the education consultant to the world's largest chemical company. Welcome to Lee.
Thank you very much, and for that very lovely introduction. Good evening, and it's lovely to be here. You've heard a little bit about me. Let me talk to you now a little bit about addressing eco-anxiety in the climate crisis. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to CAPE and what CAPE is. I won't spend long on that, and why climate change is really a priority. One thing I want to sort of talk you through is a strategy that I've used with adults and children around how to start the conversations around mitigating eco-anxiety, because sometimes it can be challenging just to find that way in. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about language and science, and the language around climate change and sustainability, and actually why some of it is really quite problematic for our children and young people. And then I'm going to finish on the importance of hope. So as you've heard, CAPE, we're an alliance of researchers, educators, a whole range of partners, and I'll give you an indication who our partners are in just a moment. We're all volunteers and we do all of this work on top of our day jobs. But we have got some fantastic partners that you can see here. We have just recently started to work with the Tate Modern as well in terms of supporting how children are engaging with art and the environment. But we are a partner and an affiliate of the Natural History Museum and recognised as a CPD provider for them, professional development provider. And we work with a range of schools and multi-academy trusts across England. Our aim really is to help teachers and young people have the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to do something really positive for the future. We'll pick up in a little while about why sometimes that knowledge can be disabling for children and young people. So it's a way of trying to sort of help with that going forward. Some of the conversations that we have with schools and adults and children are really, really challenging, and we've got these values that we hold to, and I hope these will emerge as I go through this evening with you. It's really important that we are kind in our conversations, and that's not about being nice. That's about actually being really respectful of different views and different perspectives, and actually having those conversations in a way that supports people to engage in dialogue. There's an awful lot out there, particularly in terms of education around climate change, that is based on what people think is the right thing to do. And what we're trying to do within CAPE is move to a more evidence-informed approach. So really looking at what works, where is the wealth of evidence that already exists in terms of experience in teaching, and look at actually what can we do in order to base this on something solid and move away from that idea of just because it feels like the right thing to do. And as you've seen from the range of partners that we have, we're very collaborative. We do not have all the answers ourselves. Nobody does, actually. And it's really important that we work with partners and with people who are experts in different areas to be able to support our children and young people going forward. So as I mentioned, we work with 5 school trusts and 1 federation in England. So it's more than 100 schools at the moment across the country. I think that number is actually, we're now up to about 50,000 children and young people that we work with. So whilst it is a voluntary organisation, you can see that actually we are having quite a reach. And part of what we're doing is supporting schools in embedding climate change education into their existing teaching. So we're not suggesting that it's an add-on. We're not doing anything that is, here's something that's off the shelf that you can just go and do. It's about working with the children and young people in the context that they are in, which is really important. So our thinking, I appreciate that this is quite little, but I'm going to sort of highlight some bits for you. You should be able to look at this after. I think it's important that we set out what we mean by climate change education. And this little excerpt is taken from our report, which you can find on our website if you wanted to have a little look at that later on. But it's really important for us that climate change education is made up of knowledge and skills. So what do we really need our children and young people to know? It's about equity and access, because what we know is that children's lived experiences vary depending on the socioeconomic backgrounds that they come from. So it's making sure that what is offered is equitable and is accessible to all of our children and young people in schools, and that what is offered is really coherent. So that goes back to what I said a little while ago about not just being an add-on, not just being thrown in or off the shelf, but actually really drawing together what we know about environmental education, about the societal issues, about all of the different factors that pull together to make a really, really strong climate change education piece. So what I'm going to do is outline some research and thinking around why we should argue that climate change education really is a priority. So since February, there has been a number of things that have happened. So Venezuela was the first country in the Americas to lose all of its glaciers. And that's actually a really, really massive thing if you think about it. Google interestingly reported that their greenhouse gas emissions have climbed 47% in the last 5 years. Now, the reason for that is actually the introduction predominantly of AI and the impact that that's having. And I think we can have quite often this understanding that if something is online, it's got less of a carbon footprint, and it may well have, but there's a bigger carbon footprint to a PDF document as opposed to a Word document, for example. And it's some of those really nuanced understandings that we need to sort of get behind. And that prediction of sea level rising up to 1 metre by 2100 is a real threat to life. I work with a group of schools who are in Norfolk on the coast there. So that's a real existential threat to them, actually, but in that time scale, we'd be looking at where they live being flooded. So we've got real issues there, and things that children are likely to be concerned about, and that as adults we should be. This slide here shows you a survey that's undertaken by the Children's Society every year. And what this shows us is actually our children and young people are worried about a lot of stuff, actually. If we go look at the one on the left, which was 2022, environment was actually at the top of that. So we've got a significant number of our children and young people who are worried about the environment, and then illnesses and pandemics. What we can see the following year in 2023 is that actually rising prices has risen above that. And I think I am in a very privileged position. I have young children at home. I've got 10.5-year-old twins, and they're not worried about rising prices because I protect them from that, and I'm in a position where we are lucky enough to be able to. We work with a huge number of schools in areas where there is not that privilege, And the fact that our children and young people are worried about rising prices and the environment and crime and pandemics actually lets us see that it's not just ever one thing, that there's multiple crises that these children are actually living and experiencing and maybe not even talking about. So it's just something to be aware of. But the environment is up there, and it's something that comes through thick and fast in terms of information and data that we have. Children want to know more about it. So this study was done in 2023, and it was between 14 and 18-year-olds. There was over 3,000 pupils who took part in this, and they all said, we want to know more about climate change in school, and we don't just want it to be in science, and we don't just want it to be in geography. We want this to be in all subjects. And there is a demand by the children and young people that we actually do this for them. Parents also feel that this is important. You're here listening to this, so presumably you have an interest as well. But actually, there's that sense that actually, so we've got the parents, we've got children who want to know more, who actually want to have some information that can help them to make better decisions in relation to climate change education. And why we need to teach teachers about it, and I do not want this to be misconstrued as some sort of criticism of the teachers in this school at all, but what we're faced with is a situation where we've got a huge number of our teachers are concerned about climate change, but actually the opportunities to then teach that, and that's not the teacher's fault, that's partly because of the accountability that we have in our education system, where people, our teachers are having to ensure that those children attain, and that we've got a system that doesn't necessarily allow for as much leeway. We've got a hugely overcrowded curriculum. But we've got 17% saying that it's mentioned in subjects other than science and geography, and just a small number that are saying it's really integrated into their curriculum. So that survey sort of indicates that actually those things that our children and parents are demanding aren't necessarily being met. One of the things that we do in our education system, and this comes again from maybe not knowing quite what to do about it, is that we take a resource-driven approach to looking at this. And I know I would do the same. If there's something I didn't know, the first thing I would do is go and have a look on YouTube or on Wikipedia and find that starting point. But actually, when we start to look at this, the misinformation that we find in films and videos and in the news and the different views are not necessarily helpful. So what we need to do is to really support our teachers and our education system in making this a little bit better for our children and young people. There's also this. We have a lot of conversations with teachers and people in the community, and they say, oh, we do this, we do it, climate change education, because, for example, we talk about litter picking, or we have an eco-council, or we recycle and we've planted trees. We've had somebody come in and deliver a project to our children and young people, and we talk about it in science and geography. And what I'm not saying is that those things are bad things to do at all. That's not what I mean. What we've got to be careful of is those actions are not actually climate change education. So we've got to make sure that actually what we are doing when we're talking to our children and young people in school and out of it is that we're not conflating things that are not really educating them and helping them develop the skills and knowledge to be able to take different actions, but actually with that sense of I am doing something. And that sense of doing something is really important for our children and young people, but we've got a job to do in school and as parents in the background to make sure that there is more to the education that they are getting around this. I think this is a really interesting quote. I'll give you a second to just have a little look through that there. What's really fascinating about this is when you look at the date. So this was 20 years ago, and we're in a position where we are still talking about this. So, and there's information that goes back 10 years again before this. And actually what's not happened is this is still not being made a real priority within the education system for our children and young people. I don't think anybody would argue with what Tony Blair was saying in that quote. It would be wonderful if that had actually come to fruition. So what we see now is our latest strategy that has come in from the Department for Education is around the same sort of thing that we've been talking about for 20 years. And the reason I sort of put these here is because we need to do something differently. If we're going to keep doing the same things, we're not going to make any progress. We've seen that in 20 years, we've not really moved much further forward as a whole education system. There are schools who are doing some great things, and the fact that you have got a sustainability week happening in your school now is testament to that. But what we really need, and it goes back to accessing this for all our children and young people, how do we make sure that this becomes something that can be, you know, spoken about in that way? And I think that's part of a collective responsibility that we have to make sure that this is on the agenda, and lobbying to make sure that this is something that our children and young people are talking about in school and out of it to make that happen. So what I'm going to do now is, having thrown all of that information at you, I'm going to give you a way into talking about eco-anxiety and how our children and young people feel. Eco-anxiety, it's when I first heard this term some years ago, I did think, really, is this actually a thing? But it very much is, and the surveys that have taken place and the evidence that I've sort of shown you so far really does suggest that our children and young people are worried about the environment. So there are chronic fears of what would happen in that environmental disaster. It's a natural response. It's something that happens. Our children and young people know that this is happening. The headlines are all there. They're seeing whatever they're seeing on YouTube or on the internet, so they know it's happening. So it's quite natural that there's a negative response to that, and that eco-anxiety is increasing among our children and young people. Interestingly, the last study that's cited there, Hickman has published in the Lancet. So what that's done is actually taken this to recognising it as an emergent mental health issue and a medicalisation of this situation. So it is gathering absolute credibility in terms of this is a thing that does exist. One of the things that Hickman is now talking about is eco-empathy rather than eco-anxiety, because of that idea that actually it's probably okay to feel worried about the planet and to all the things that are happening. So this little activity, as I said, it's up to you if you want to grab a piece of paper now and have a go. One of the things that I've done with children from age 6 up to, as I say, teachers, adults, I'm doing this with a group of head teachers just on Thursday. What do you think the Earth will look like in 50 years? And one of the reasons that we do this activity is because it gives us a way in to talking. So sometimes our children and young people don't have the words to articulate what they actually think about it and what they feel, and how they are going to be able to sort of express that. So by getting them to draw a picture, it can be really, it just gives them a way in that's not as challenging as articulating it verbally or by writing it down. And they can annotate it. What we then do is say, okay, well, talk to me, describe your picture. So it'd be really interesting to do this with your own children or between siblings, get siblings to do this together. Describe your picture, and just listening to the language that is being used, because that gives you a real sense of how children are feeling about it. Quite often we get a mix with this. Some children are huge optimists, and they are just, they see the technological impact. So they have drones doing everything. They've got flying cars. They've got everything in that technological world that thinks going to be absolutely fantastic. But I have to say that the majority of them are flooded Earth, things on fire, a really despairing picture, actually. So what we then do is use this, because, as I say, sometimes it's quite difficult for children to find the words. And we look at this and go, okay, so what are you talking about? Those words that you're using, how does that image make you feel? And what this can do is give them a little sense of, actually, do you know what? I'm a bit, despair comes through quite a lot. So does the sense of frustration. because some of them think that actually as adults we should have done something about this before now and haven't done. But what we can do is we can sort of start to group that and go, well, actually, which colour do you sit in most? And that's helpful, because what it does is it gives us, again, another way in to sort of saying, right, okay, well, if that's how you feel, what can we do about it? Because if we don't know how those children and young people are feeling, there's not much that we can do in order to be able to support that. So what's really important is that we have some sense of control. So if you go back to one of the things that where I started saying that what we want our children to do is have the knowledge and skills to be able to take action. What action can they have? Because what often comes about is they feel quite isolated and lonely in this situation. So what we want to do here is to say, right, okay, write down all of the things that you can control. What are the things that I can't control? So I can't control what the supermarket procurement processes are. What I can control is, to an extent, what I buy and where I buy it from. And I will caveat that again in terms of the social economic status of our children, is that some people don't have that privilege. Some people are, accessing food from food banks, for example, so they don't necessarily have that control over what my food is wrapped in or where I've bought it from. But there is the opportunity for us to control some things around that. Do I walk to school? Do I get a bus? Do I get a lift? Those sorts of things. So having that sense of collective action, what can we control? And actually, when I sit and then talk about this with my partner or with people in my class or with my family, it's not just me. So suddenly I actually feel a little bit bigger in this space than I did before, because what we're now introducing is the notion of collective action. So it's not me on my own, the only person who is doing some more recycling. It's me and my family who have committed to that. It's me and my classmates. It's me and my year group, whoever that is. And that can make a huge difference, because the burden that our children and young people feel weighs really, really heavily on them. That actually, what can I do? And that then translates into ultimately apathy, because they go, well, don't make any difference because it's just me. Where if we work in a collective action, and whether that's, as I say, within a class, in a family, within a community, it can be really, really beneficial and really empowering. So what we then do is move back to this emotion wheel and think, well, actually, when we're working together, how does that make us feel? And quite often at that point, children are talking about feeling more empowered. Actually, I feel inspired because it's not just me. I have got people around me who can support in this. I feel hopeful. And we see a shift in that just in a matter of an hour of doing this exercise and working that way. So it's really, really beneficial in that sense. So something that I'm going to leave with you that you can, like say, take away and try, if you feel that would help as a way into your having those conversations. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about language that we use now, and why sustainability, I think, can be problematic. Quite often when we talk about sustainability, it's a very blanket term that we use for a whole range of different things. And one of the issues is that quite often it's presented as something that is it's simple, when actually it's a really complex thing. When we actually look at what does sustainability mean, what is it made up of in terms of environmental, societal, economic, all the different facets that come together, we have to then think about how do we break that down? What does actually environmental sustainability mean to our children and young people? What does it mean when we talk about it in school? What does it mean when you're talking about it, in everyday language? So we need to acknowledge that actually it's not very as straightforward as it might seem. It's quite often presented as a solution. And I think that's quite dangerous, because we talk about something being sustainable as if actually we can act sustainably, and I'm doing sustainable things, but they're not sustainable enough. We're still crossing the boundaries of our resource. So what we need to do is be really careful about this. And part of that comes down to as well what we still don't know. So we're starting to find microplastics, for example, in sperm, in brains, in our organs, in a way that, you know, that, and surely that is not sustainable. So we've got to be careful about what we're talking about here. There's a lovely phrase in Scotland, and it's if something is not on a secure foundation, or particularly coat is on a sugary peg, so it's going to fall off at some point. And quite often we talk about sustainability in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and I don't know how much you know about these, but there's 17 big goals, and behind that sit about another 169 statements that as country goals we are working towards their economic targets that are agreed across the world, and we are working towards them on a country basis. Quite often we see education. I go into a lot of schools where there's a poster on the wall that has all the SDGs there, and we talk about quality of education, or we talk about removing poverty. And actually, we've got a problem with these goals because they were established and they're not being met. We're not making enough progress towards them. So I think we've got to be really careful that now these things are based on that, and it's perhaps not the strongest of foundations. The last one is, I think, is really important, where it really comes down to what we can do with our children and young people in and out of school, is that without that foundational knowledge, without really knowing what these things mean, we've not got a basis again that we're building on. So we need to be really clear about what is it we need our children and young people to know, and what does that mean in terms of what do I need to know as a teacher or as a parent in order to support my child or pupil having that right information to be able to then understand really what is going on. And it's beyond sort of, we all know about climate change. It's about trying to get to the decision-making part of that. And we can't really make decisions and take actions unless we really know what it is that we are dealing with. I'm going to skip through these quite quickly because this is it's an example of the language part, but I just thought it was quite interesting in terms of we have different tiers of vocabulary in the science national curriculum, and we talk about words that have specific science meanings, but also that we use in everyday language. And these come through thick and fast when we start to talk about climate change. And what it means, if you go back to that last slide where I said about having that really strong foundation of knowledge, we need to be really clear what we mean in these things. And we do it with other words in science. So we talk about weight and we talk about mass, which are used interchangeably in everyday language. And we have to be really clear what we mean with our science specific definitions. And it's very similar with this. We need to be really clear what it is that we mean when we are using this language in relation to climate change or sustainability, if that's what we're talking about. There's other tiers that fall in. You know, what do we mean when we're looking at evidence? What is that evidence that we're asking for? What is the evidence for climate change? What is the evidence against it? There are people who will still argue that it is not something that is caused by people. What are the models that we're using? So all of these phrases that we hear in the news when they're reporting on it actually have got really specific science meanings and things that we need to help our children and young people explore when they are talking about this. And the final tier is this, that is that really specific, high scientific knowledge and understanding. Net zero is a really, really interesting one in terms of people's understanding of what they think they mean by that. And I was speaking at something a few months ago and I got an email afterwards from somebody who said, could you come and I'm chair of governors at school, could you please come and talk to the governors about us achieving zero carbon? And if we achieve zero carbon in the planet, we're all in a really big heap of bother, because actually we need carbon. It's a really important part of our lives. But the everyday understanding around that is a problem. So we need to be really clear with our children and young people going forwards that they have a real grasp of this knowledge to be able to, and this language, sorry, to be able to make those informed decisions as they go forward. So when we start to think about that language, it's about building up that complex knowledge and understanding of that picture. It supports the subject learning. So what you actually do by having those conversations and talking about this outside of school as well is enable those children as they go forward, when they are undertaking their GCSEs or whatever exams they're doing, to be able to then use that language appropriately. And it supports that in terms of, like I say, those academic terms. What it means is we reduce those gaps as well in that sort of literacy piece. So what we want a society that is carbon literate, that understands actually what we mean when we're talking about the carbon cycle and what we mean by net zero, and be able to then take the climate action that we want going forward. Okay, I'm very conscious that I have thrown a lot of stuff at you so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish on this idea of the importance of hope, because a lot of this is really, really depressing stuff when you actually look through it. So this quote comes from a fantastic professor who works at Bishop's University in Canada, and she talks about the importance of acknowledging eco-anxiety, which is what we're here to talk about. That sense of actually we need to make sure that we value that when our children say, actually, I'm worried about this, that we address that and we don't just dismiss it as it'll be fine, or, you know, not acknowledge that as a real concern that they have. So it's about us recognizing that that exists, but also enabling them to sort of turn that into something that is really disabling to something that can be constructive action. So it's about trying to help them understand what's going on, develop the resilience and hope in there that they can actually go, do you know what, I can make a difference and I can do this going forward. And that will help in terms of their emotional health as well. When we talk about hope, we've got to be really careful. Do you know what we don't want to do is have that sense of everything, you know, is really optimistic, it's all going to be fine, and it actually, you know, that's not fair, is it, on our children and young people. But we can have radical hope that, you know, despite the fact that we've got an uncertain future, we can go, do you know what, we can make a difference. We are resilient as a community and as a culture, and there are new possibilities that we can think about. Maria Ajala's work around constructive hope is always beautifully written, and it's that sense of actually we've got to focus on what can be achieved, and it's that realistic sense of we are where we are, what can we do about it, and we've got to be really, really careful about false hope. It worries me when we have this sense of children perhaps writing to the CEO of Tesco's and saying, you need to do something differently. And that's only ever going to come back as a letter full of platitudes and just, yes, you're right, we need to, you know, we prioritize, you know, supporting environmental issues or whatever comes back. And actually that doesn't lead to any meaningful action for those children and young people. So we've got to think carefully about what we're asking them to do. I've mentioned already about the vulnerabilities of children living in different environments, and this is, I think, is where we come together really as educators and parents and think about the realistic solutions for our children and young people. Electric cars, solar panels are going to be prohibitively expensive for a huge majority of the children and young people who are living this climate crisis at the moment. And what we need to do, and it's a beautiful phrase, we need to give them the windows to see the solution, to see the issues that are out there, but we also need to give them the mirrors to be able to see themselves as part of the solution. So it's really important that we address that in a way that actually positions our local communities and our children in that setting, to be able to see themselves as looking at the problem as a community, but also had then what their role is in order to make that better, if you like. That's got to be supported by those three principles. It's not just a case of doing those actions, but it's about what do we need our children to know? How do we help them to self-regulate in the ways that I've been talking about, to bring about collective action? And I think what's really important is that we don't take knowledge in isolation. For years and years, we have taught in GCSE biology about the dangers of taking drugs. That doesn't stop children and young people going on and taking drugs. They know about it, doesn't stop it happening. So we need to think carefully about what is the knowledge and how are we crafting that alongside the self-regulation to feel more empowered and understand the collective action that can be taken. So I'm going to finish with this quotation here from Maria Ojala, who I mentioned earlier. And it's lovely in terms of that sense of seeing hope is an absolute must. It's really, really important that actually we are sitting there and acknowledging that hope is so important in terms of the well-being and climate change engagement for our children and young people, and helping them to get over that sense of hopelessness or any disengagement that they may have. So thank you very much for your time so far. I think, shall I remove this PowerPoint now? There you go, you've done it. Yep.
Marvelous. Okay, so if anybody's got any questions, then please do ping them through. Just while we're waiting for any questions, I've got a couple, if that's okay. I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's really, really worthwhile having these conversations and being the sustainability lead at Forest School. You know, eco-anxiety is out there. You know, we do have children that are you know, are coming to me myself asking you know, very relevant questions, and it's about how we can shape that in such a way that we don't paralyze them with fear, but we learn about the actions, which does lead me into my first question. Really, is media is still heavily focused on the negative aspects of climate change. There is a huge amount of great work going on out there. How do we approach that when we've got, you know, media and unfortunately politics as well, unfortunately tending to focus on the doom and gloom, highlighting, you know, the dramatization of it?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And one of the other issues is around actually the amount of misinformation that's out there, as well as negative information. And in terms of YouTube is absolutely full. There's a beautiful study done earlier in the year that was released, looking at actually the amount of misinformation that was in videos and things. And as you know, children and young people, YouTube's just like gospel, isn't it? If my children will just tell me, oh, well, but no, Mum, you're wrong. I saw it on YouTube. It must be right. So I think there is something to be done, and I think it comes down to that sense of how are we engaging our children and young people to be literate in that sense of media interrogation anyway. So when what we should be doing is looking at science headlines and going, okay, well, let's just have a little look at this. So when something is positioned as this is the latest breakthrough, what does that mean? What's going on behind that? And enabling them to have those sorts of skills so that they can then do that in light of actually, so when this is presented in the headline of whatever newspaper it is that they are seeing, actually, what is there something behind that? What does that mean? How do I have, what skills can I use to be able to look at that and challenge it? And I think we do that more so as adults. So it's about sort of embedding those skills.
Yeah, fantastic. And the other question I've got is about the education elements, you know, specifically for schools. So at Forest, we know we have embedded it within our Year 7's activities program. I think out of the 17 SDGs, they're learning about 8 of it across a 10-week module. But something we're, you know, very conscious on in looking at the guidance out there is it's not compulsory for schools. So, you know, we have set up climate literacy training for our staff, and of course it's voluntary. They are incredibly busy with the things they have to teach. You know, how are we going to get this across every subject in a spiral curriculum so that pupils do understand it's not just, you know, renewable energy engineers. There's got to be sustainability in every single industry across this.
Yeah, and it's really difficult, this, because even if it is mandated, it doesn't mean it will be done well. And that's one of the problems, isn't it? That it could then become tick box and actually less effective than doing it in the way that, schools that are enthusiastic about it and are committed to it will do it. And I don't think we will see a radical overhaul of this in relation to the new curriculum that will emerge in the next small number of years. So it's a case of having that social responsibility and a moral and ethical one to say, actually, no, this is our choice. And as a leader in a school, I'm being really bold and saying, yes, this is going to be a focus for us and our children and young people.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Okay, well, I'll just summarize a couple of things that we're doing this week. So if anybody does have any questions, and now is the time. So we are doing our sustainability week at the moment, and we've had some really engaging assemblies led by our pupil sustainability committee. So these are a group of our pupils across all ages that have created the presentations and delivering it to every single pupil across the school. And so far we've done sixth form, we've done lower school, and we've done middle school. So it's going really, really well. And our young children are passionate about this. They do want to see not just us within Forest School doing more, but they want to see it in education. They are telling us that they're talking to parents and carers about what these little changes, what we can make in our school life and in our home life. And it is, as Lee said, it's not just about solar panels and electric cars. It's, can we swap out that single-use plastic? These little quick wins that actually has a massive impact. If we can all do these little things. But no, I think it's been a really, really fantastic webinar. So thank you so much, Lee. I think it's been incredibly useful. Lots of little takeaways, certainly for me as well. And unless there's any questions, I think we will call that a day. And I'm just checking now. No, there's nothing there. So, well, thank you so much. Confirm there's nothing there. So, yeah, thank you so much, Lee. And hopefully we'll stay in touch and hopefully share some good, positive climate action stories in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.